Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. The War Within expansion only launched a handful of days ago in an official capacity, and so far the honeymoon period has been unreal. Already thousands of players have been able to level up a bunch of characters. Even after the recent level nerf, leveling is still actually ridiculously easy. Besides this, players have been able to dive into delves and interact with a ton of open world content, do a bunch of mount farming, early gearing, and explore some of the different playstyles and hero spec options, with even more Season 1 content on the horizon, releasing in roughly less than 2 weeks. However, even as we were just about to get Season 1 content, apparently they got even more cooking in the background, with patches such as 11.05 and 11.07 being worked on internally, which means we can't really test them out on a PTR or get an early preview just yet. But in the near future, we will be able to. This is on top of data mined items that suggest some of the new zones and new raids we'll be going to. Places such as the Rootlands, the home of the elusive Elun'Ahir, and potentially raids such as an Etherial raid and even a Goblin raid in the future. As always, if you guys want to see more future updates for the War Within expansion, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. Otherwise, let's dive into all of the new items that may show what future may hold for this expansion. So first of all, let's talk about the Rootlands, or at least kind of like the naming that we have for this future zone. Right now it is kind of colloquially, quote unquote, is called Rootlands, but essentially we had data mined the maps for the War Within expansion a while back during the alpha and the beta. Now, we got partial data mining of the actual clear images, but it gives us an idea where we potentially maybe be going in future updates for this expansion. When you take a look at the actual data mined image that we have, it shows at the top right some of the approved chunk sizes, and it names some of the areas called Earthen Isle, Earthworks, Outer Canyons. All of those zones are kind of like the early naming convention for the zones that we would know instead of Earthen Isle, the Isle of Dorn. Instead of the Earthenworks, it is the Ringing Deep. Instead of Outer Canyons, it is the Hollowfall, and down below Nerubi, it's just called Nerubians. That would be what is known as Ashkahet. In that approved chunk, however, and the chunk sizes, we see a fifth zone, but it's described as the Rootlands. So a lot of players are assuming that this is most likely going to be, or potentially was planned to be, a fifth zone back in during the development of this expansion, but they never quite got around to actually implementing it, or it wasn't quite finished, or during the process they decided to place it and put it off to the side as potentially part of a future update. So Rootlands looks like was a zone that was at least planned to be somewhere in between of Hollowfall as well as Ashkahet. We may even have some in-game links for it. But Rootlands potentially may be the place we'll be going to in a patch like 11.1 or 11.2, one of the major content patch updates that we've seen in the past. But besides data mine maps, we also do have some in-game items to take a look at, and sometimes, and this is what I love about WoW, is when devs add items like text or books that eventually kind of spoils what the next expansion may be, or may hint at a future update for WoW. Back during the pre-patch of Dragonflight, they released a dungeon as part of the gearing process for that expansion that actually had a book, one of the Titan texts after the first two bosses of the Dragonflight's version of Uldaman were defeated. Walk past the big doors that are opened by a handful of dwarves, and on the right hand side would be a pages of text that basically describe Khazalgar, the zone itself, the Titan facility with a specific number, but it also goes on and talks a little bit about the Earthen and the Isle of Dorn, and a little bit about the culture of these Earthen. It describes how they're very, very similar to some of the other Earthen that have been developed, what we know right now as dwarves, but these Earthen are still constructs under the directive of Titans. But if anything, the book was able to at least place Khazalgar on the map, or at least place it in-game, even though through text. And at the time, nobody really knew exactly what Khazalgar would look like, but now that we're here, that text matches the descriptions and everything that we see right now in the Isle of Dorn. And more books like these have been added throughout that expansion too. During the third content update for Dragonflight, where we get to go to the Emergicell, a brand new world tree where Night Elves will create their new home. When we get to go into the actual Emerald Dream, there's a book in the main central campment area which is titled The Legends of Elun'Ahir. At least, hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly. Basically, that entire text and that entire story talks about how the Titans came to the rescue of Azeroth, which was surrounded in the corruption, being primarily the Old Gods and the Black Empire. During that time, Elun'Ahir planted a gift given by Elune herself, a branch of the Ganir, the mother world tree to be planted in the soil to create new life on Azeroth after the Titans have finally secured it. This branch grew into a tree with its roots extending deep below the ground, bringing in new life to the planet. Though Aman'Thul didn't really like that. Titans stand for order, not disorder, and this wildlife sprouting out of every single crevice is just too much, and he ripped the tree with its trunk out of the ground, destroying it. Einar, initially distraught, wept for this tree's destruction, but noticed quickly that the roots of this tree are still holding on together, holding on strong, interwoven, hiding below the ground, away from the sight of all the other Titans, Aman'Thul included, and decided just to let it be, not share that information with the other Titans, to let the roots of that destroyed world tree continue to grow and exist below the surface. And if you walk around through Ashkahet, you'll notice that there's an obvious amount of roots scattered somewhere in between of Hollowfall and Ashkahet. I mean, these roots stretch for a while, long while. And then you'll also be happy to know that the Rootlands happens to be the home of the Elun'Ahir. The Elun'Ahir being this offshoot side faction that we don't really know much about, but immediately as soon as players saw them during the early cinematics and the early cutscenes for the War Within, even though there wasn't a lot of focus on them compared to the Arathi of Hollowfall or the Earthen of the Isle of Dorn, Elun'Ahir were able to capture the attention of literally everybody in the WoW community, with so many players hoping that maybe one day we'll be able to play these night elf kind of troll and porcupine hybrid creatures at some point in the future, because they have the skeleton of that of a night elf, both the male and the female models. So basically they're a step away from being playable, but they also have unique customization options, specifically with them always being kind of like prehistoric underground beings. And the Elun'Ahir have the perfect makings of a future allied race. Now, Blizzard did not confirm whether we are getting more allied races in the future. Maybe they're just saving it until a future update, but it wouldn't be that surprising because back in BFA we got a lot of allied races. So the assumption is they're much easier to create than brand new races with their own skeletons, their own textures, their own animations, how we will be able to rig the character into all these different poses that have been created for multiple different classes. Because, I mean, the Earthen Dwarves, for instance, are just normal dwarfs, just a little bit larger with a slightly new set of racials. And the Elun'Ahir are in essence night elves, just like a modified version of night elves with their own unique customization options, and there's quite a lot of them to pick from, at least based on the current model viewers. But I do want to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments though. Would you want to visit the Rootlands? Do you think it potentially could be a place that will be going in the future? Or maybe it's a scrapped idea that they're not going to revisit, because I feel like there's even in-game text that links the Titans to the Rootlands. It just would make sense. But also, if the Elun'Ahir were to be made a playable race, what class options do you think they would have? Obviously, there would be warriors, hunters, most likely druids, but could you see them be things like rogues, maybe priests, warlocks, or shamans? Let me know all the thoughts of what you think the Elun'Ahir should probably be able to play if they were to become a possible allied race in the future. So far we talked about potential zones that we could visit in a future update, or potential playable races that we'll be able to embody as, but what other content could they potentially introduce in future updates? And that is raids. What other raids could we potentially visit? What other places will we go to in future expansions? Now, 2 items, or I guess multitudes of items being found out through data mining, some of which are going to be fan favorites, which are titled Ethereal Raid _ items _ chimes and communicators. But I mean, it doesn't really matter what the item could be, but the Ethereal Raid tag, that gets me excited if it is real. I mean, first of all, Ethereals have been an awesome and a fan favorite race since TBC. They are very enigmatic, not much is known about them, but every time you see them, players get excited. In Legion, when players get to meet the Locust Walker and how he helps Alariah to become this Void Hunter that she currently is. I mean, he is a character that struck out towards the tail end of that expansion, and then they brought him back towards the center stage again for a cinematic, where he talks about how they as a people, the Ethereals, what they are right now, at the time heard the radiating song for the world also, and they didn't listen or weren't able to respond fast enough, and that is how the world was swallowed up by a Void Lord Demencius. Learning more about Ethereals, they actually are, as a people, have vowed to fight against the Void at any cost, and especially against the Void Lords, and with Xal'atath being the harbinger to bring in the Void. I mean, it feels like they're definitely going to be involved at some point in the future. either by the end of this expansion or by the next entry of Midnight. Ethereals could also be observed in the Neurobar Palace, and one of the bosses we'll be able to encounter is a Nexus Princess Kaivessa, who has some kind of a deadly secret that she is willing to do everything she can in order to make sure it doesn't get out. So most likely once the raid releases, there'll be more information that will connect the Ethereals further back into, I guess, the main core story of the expansion, which may lead us into a potential Ethereal Nexus raid. Now, besides ethereal items, they also were able to data mine an offhand item called One-Handed Goblin Raid -D-01, which suggests that maybe, instead of an ethereal raid, we might at some point in the future be seeing a goblin raid as well. Gazlo is a central character if you've done the storyline of Ashkahet. I don't want to really go into details and spoil it completely, but definitely should play through the main storyline, and Gazlo is going to be a more involved character. I mean, there was even a whole story thing written about Gazlo and how he's going to be more involved in the storyline as one of the key characters of this expansion, like as part of the content that's released in anticipation to this expansion. So with goblins involved, there's a couple of different things they could do. Now, the WoW Wiki describes a place we'd never actually get to visit called the Undermine, which is a subterranean city of goblins, deep down into the tunnels below the starting zone of the goblins, which is the Isle of Kazan. We never really get to go into the Undermine. Instead, we get to hang out on the top surface of Kazan during the Cataclysm expansion, which is the goblin starting area, before everything went completely up in flames thanks to our good friend Natharian, or Deathwing. For the longest time, everybody thought that Kazan was absolutely destroyed, obliterated, as the volcano of Kazan erupted and scorched everything all around it. However, we actually get to go back to remnants of Kazan during Battle for Azeroth in a dungeon of Motherlode. We get to go back to Kazan that's kind of going through a bit of a restoration, but more of a mining operation, as the goblin crews is there mining as much Azerite as humanly possible, though not much is being said in the Motherlode dungeon of what actually happened down in the deeps, if maybe the goblin city of Undermine still exists. And there's a potential that Undermine is still alive and well below the surface, protected some way, somehow from Deathwing's destruction, or maybe somehow transformed in one way or another with all that Azerite pouring out of it. And on top of it, if you go to the Weaver's Lair, down below, there's even a little encampment of goblins that are populated the place recently. And maybe in the future, this place could be one of the hubs where there would be other vendors and maybe other factions of goblins banding together as we venture further deep into the Undermine itself as a potential future raid going forward. Either way, though, all of those little revelations and little leaks and little data mine things that players have been able to put together, all of those things excite me to no degree. Cannot wait to see where this expansion goes forward, because so far, everything has been a blast, but that is the honeymoon period with every expansion. At the very start, everything's exciting, everything is awesome. Hell, even Shadowlands was fantastic for the first few months even. And then things really start to fall apart later down the line. But hopefully they'll give us some kind of an update of what we can expect in the future, or at least some hints at what could potentially be available in future updates. But with that being said, that's literally everything we got so far when it comes to what future could hold in the War Within expansion. But with that being said, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope all of you enjoyed. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like. I would very, very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community. Link to that is in the description of every single one of these videos. Would love to see you guys join the Discord community. As always, let me know all of your thoughts about everything we took a look at so far in the comment section down below, and I'll see all of you guys in the next one.